I'm really no good with Legion. No good at all. Not gonna lie. And my controller died. It was just on, but now it's not on. Isn't that cool? What are you doing down there, monkey? Fuck it. Hi, K6. I was playing as Legion. I got a duct. I can't believe it. Those two already. Shut up. I'm a Gorgon. I don't have to work tomorrow. I was thinking I might try Tomb Raider again. Since I have the whole day, if I'm not enjoying it, I'll have time to switch to this. Boom. Where you been all day? Good boy. Sit down. Get up here. I'm not moving. I'm okay. Cool. I can move. So I have what, portals? There. I don't know how to use portal. I don't know how to find a portal. I guess I should have read something. Did I do that? I don't know if I'll make it, but I made it. Hey, you got me. Are you gonna be a problem? Somebody went that way. Don't fade, don't fade, don't fade. Well, I got two. And that guy is gonna be a problem. I knew he would. Where's my shack? God damn it. I didn't get adept. I looked as soon as I started. I looked around and I didn't see where the fucking portals are. If I see a portal, I'll jump in it. Like, I really want to get adept. I don't want to fuck around. I don't want to, like, learn how to use killers that I don't want to use. Did it say that? I thought I was looking for portals. I assumed they would be near the generators, like with Alien. No, it's, Demogorgon. I don't know, maybe I have to create them. I don't know how. Somebody told me that he used the same system as Alien, so I just figured, like, there's gonna be portals somewhere near generators, but then I didn't see any, and I forgot. Really just gonna focus on killing the people and then getting to change character. I don't care so much how this one works. Oh, it says open portal right there. Okay, I don't know how that works. They're over here. I just don't want to play this match. I spent time in the beginning trying to like figure out his powers and it fucked the whole thing up. And if I leave, I don't know how long my ban is gonna be. I saw somebody get an hour ban earlier. Fucked up. They literally didn't do anything wrong either. The killer had them slugged for like so long. And they just fucking didn't want to sit there like that. That's just gonna encourage them to stay and fuck around. I'm gonna get out. It's not gonna be fun to fuck with me if they think I'm not even there. I don't want to invest any points in making his fucking perks better. Are they even gonna get better? Already fucking. Yeah, that one will get better. That one will get better too. Fuck. I want to spend my points on him. Fine. I don't have any points left now. They all have flashlights. What the fuck kind of one more try. And then maybe I'll go play Survivor. Table's up next. right? So guess I'd rather do a 10 rush team. Probably kick my ass too. I bet they all have a perk to like drop their goddamn toolboxes and get a flashlight out of a chest. I bet all of them do. I'm really high. I am really, really high. Weed is way better than I deserve. I do have the shack thing. So the hatch was at the shack, that first Demogorgon game. And I just find the fucking shack. Why couldn't I find What's that even worth doing? That wasn't worth doing. That wasted time. wasn't gonna get them all anyway. I'd rather they get away. Okay, that was my last try with the cube. Now. Fucking awesome. I can't quit. I didn't do anything wrong. What the fuck? It's not a band. What's happening? What is this? I can't play and I can't stop the game. I can't close it. Do I turn the computer off? Oh, never mind. What the fuck? Fucking weird. Unstable snap. I think I already... I don't know what these are though. Fucking... Oh god. Yay. I like joining other people's invocations. I don't want to fucking have one. I don't want to be broken. Only in the basement. Okay. I don't have to use them. I just... Fucking sucks that I almost won that first Demogorgon match and then didn't. Fucking sucks that would make me so happy if I wasn't going for a death. Who wrote The Terror? What was the guy's name? Oh no. Oh, that's right. I'm stable. Hi. Haha. What? We got stuff to do. Oh. I don't know how to get to that basement. Oh no! Oh! Damn it! You almost have that shit. It's been so cool. Oh fuck. That was a mistake. I didn't mean to be a cake cunt. Why didn't you come with me? So busy. Where did you go? You're doing nothing. I've taken 2 hooks already, and you're fucking you're playing with snowmen? It's over here. You guys go do that shit. Not a single fucking gen anywhere over here? What the fuck? Well, it's definitely gonna come this way, so now they have a chance to do it, Jen. I didn't push that button. Would never push. Good night, K6. Tyrion. Why don't I have the abominable? The abridged version. There it is. I don't have it. It's odd because I've listened to it a lot of times. I must have downloaded it. Confirm. Those motherfucker. Download that shit right now. What is Artifact? Doesn't matter, I'm not listening to that one. There it is.
Chat Audio presents. Written by Dan Simmons. Read by Kevin T. Collins. I'm Jake. I had a long-time interest in continental exploration and explorers, actually since the International Geophysical Union in 1957-58. The U.S. established permanent bases down there, which really grabbed my teenage imagination. And around 1990, I had a vague hunch that there might be an idea for a novel set in Antarctica. It was to be another 15 years before I actually wrote and published a book about a doomed Arctic, not Antarctic, expedition, my 2007 novel, The Terror. But in the summer of 1991, it was that time again. I had to suggest a package of 3 new books to my publisher. My interest was in Antarctica, not the North Polar expeditions, which never interested me very much, but which I eventually ended up writing about. And that interest was fueled by many more years of about the adventures of Ernest Shackleton, Robert Falcon Scott, Ashley Cherry Garrard, and other heroes and martyrs of the Antarctic. During that summer of 1991, a friend of my wife's said that she knew an actual Antarctic explorer. This old guy had moved into an assisted living home for the elderly in the little town of Delta on the western slope of Colorado. Actually with Rear Admiral Richard Byrd during American expeditions to Antarctica in the 1930s. At least Karen said that this is what Mary had told her. Personally, I suspected Alzheimer's, lying, an inveterate teller of tall tales, or all 3. According to Mary, this 89-year-old gentleman, Jacob Perry, had been on the 1934 U.S. Antarctic expedition. That was the Cluster Point expedition, in which Admiral Byrd, always eager for a bit more solo fame, had spent 5 winter months alone in a hole in ice at an advanced meteorological station, where he almost died from carbon monoxide poisoning due to a poorly ventilated stove. Byrd was to write his best-selling book about this experience, a book titled, obviously enough, Alone. According to what Mary said to my wife Karen, this elderly Jacob Perry had been one of 4 men who crossed 100 miles of Antarctica in total darkness and howling storms of the 1934 South Polar winter, rescued Admiral Byrd. Then the whole group had to wait until October, advent of the Antarctic summer, to be rescued themselves. It sounds like the perfect information about the South Pole, said Karen. I might write the whole book about this Mr. Perry. It was the Admiral Perry who also was the first to reach the North Pole. Perry, said, Perry of the Antarctic. But he's not the Rear Admiral Robert Perry who claimed to be the first man to reach the North Pole in 1909. Why not? Said Karen. Well, first of all, there's the difference in spelling of their names, I said, mildly irritated at being poked into action, or perhaps irritated in the way I always am. Anyone else, suggests what I should be writing about. I spelled the difference between Admiral Perry, A-R-Y, and Mary's little old man, Mr. Perry, R-R-Y. Also, I said, Admiral Perry, about 130-some years old. All right, said Karen, holding up her hands in a signal worked out over decades of language. A signal that theoretically keeps either working from going through the jungle. I stand corrected. This Mr. Perry might still have a wonderful story to tell, and also, I interrupted, somewhat jerk, Admiral Robert Perry in 1920. Well, this Jacob Perry is still alive in Delta, said Karen. Perry? Because of his age? Anyone who's 89 or 90 falls into the category of barely alive. No, in 1991, anyone over 60 circled the brain. Interests of full disclosure, I admit that I'm now 62 years old as I write this preface in 2000. No, not just his age, said Karen. Now, Mary also mentioned that he has cancer. Still gets around, evidently, but I've been at my computer just fiddling around with ideas for books, typing in possible titles. Karen, come in. Now I turned the computer on. really says he was with Bird in Antarctica in 34? I said. Yeah, said Kim. Somehow my wife manages not to sound sick even when she's correct.
I was fucking lucky.
Out of the office for a few days. It'd be a 5 or 6 hour ride, staying on the interstate all the way to Grand Junction. Stay overnight with Guy, Mary, Delta. Get off I-7, go through Carbondale, and then up and over Cougar Pass. And
How do you have time to kick that and catch up with me?
just watch. I was thinking of what clothes I'd throw in my duffel for the 2-day trip, assuming I'd talk to Mr. Perry the morning of the second day and head home. I had a little North Face soft duffel, perfect for Miata's tiny trunk. I made a mental note to bring my Nikon camera. These were critical days, at least when it was dark. So, because of my urge to drive my new 1991 Mazda Miata in the mountains, I met Mr. Jacob. Delta, Colorado was a town of about 6,000 people. Coming at it the way I did, turning south off I-7 up Springs, then turning onto Highway 65 at Carbondale, following that narrow 2-lane road over the high passes and past the remote outposts of Marble and Peoria. One gets a sense of how surrounded by mountains the little town is. Delta is in a wide river basin south of the Grand Canyon, which locals describe as one of the largest flat-top mountains in the world. The place where Jake Perry, Delta, certainly didn't look like an old folks' home, much less one where nursing help was available 24 hours a day. The persistence of several federal grants, Perry had renovated a once grand but now run-down hotel and merged into an empty store next door. The result was a space that felt more like a 4-star hotel from, say, 1900 than assisted living. I found that Jacob had his own third floor. Part of Mary's renovation was putting in elevators. After Mary's introductions and explanations again of why I wanted to talk to him, Ken was a novelist doing research on a possible book set at the South Pole, and he'd heard of Jake, she said. Mr. Perry invited me. Whom and the man seemed complimented. I was surprised how large Perry's room was. Double bed, near one of 3 windows, looked out and over the roofs of the lower downtown stores toward the mountains and Grand Mesa to gorgeous ceiling bookcases filled with hardcover books, many of them I noticed about mountain ranges around the world, and mementos, foils of old-style climbing rope, Brooks glass goggles such as Arctic explorers used to wear, worn leather motorcycle, ancient Kodak camera, old ice axe with a wooden staff much longer than modern ice axes have. As for Jacob Perry, the man was 89 years old, and gravity had taken him toll. Some curvature and compression in the spine over 9 decades had robbed the man of an inch or 2 of height, still over 6 feet tall. He was wearing a short sleeved denim shirt, and I could see where his biceps had withered some with age, but his muscles were still sculpted. His forearms.
Where are you going? This is your hook, bitch.
The upper part of his body was, even after time.
No! It's fucking her turn!
Shaped from a life.
You cunt. You fucking dirty cunt.
Before I noticed that
Both of y'all. You're both the same fucking dirty cunt.
Flesh over the stubs of bone just above the knuckles was brown and as rugged as the rest of the skin on his hands and arms. And his fingers didn't seem to bother his dead staring. Later, while talking, Mr. Perry fiddled with 2 pieces of leather shoestring, each about 18 inches inches long. I was amazed to see that he could tie complicated knots, one with each hand, using
Well,
both hands to tie the knots at the same
if
time.
I get out of this, I'm gonna go upstairs and hide in a locker.
Climbing knots because I couldn't tie them, but using both of my hands and the assistance of a Boy Scout troop. Mr. Perry, without looking, I tied such knots, each hand working, and then absent-minded untied only the two fingers and thumb of his left hand. It seemed to be an old habit, perhaps one to calm. Paid little attention to either the finished knots or the
Great.
process. With hands, I felt my fingers disappear, larger and still more powerful. It's making no small-town bully effort to squeeze. The strength is simply still there. Mr. Perry's face showed too many fingers in the sunlight, high altitude and humid air supply. UV had had its way with his epidermal cells, and between the permanent brown patches, there were scars where it had small surgeries for possible melanomas. The old man still had hair, and kept it cut quite short. His brown scalp, gray. He smiled, showed his own teeth, save perhaps for 2 or 3 missing on the lower sides and back. It was Mr. Perry's blue eyes which I've remembered the most clearly. Startling, and it seemed these were not the distracted eyes of a man in late 80s. Perry's bright eyes, his curious, attentive, bold, almost childlike. When I work with writers of any age, I warn them against describing their characters by comparing them with stars or famous people. It's lazy, it's time-bound, and it's a cliche. Still, 15 years later, my wife Karen and I were watching the movie Casino Royale, first of the James Bond films, Daniel Craig as James Bond. I whispered excitedly, "Those are the kind of blue and blue eyes that Mr. Perry had. In fact, Daniel Craig looks a lot like a young version of my late Mr. Perry." Karen looked at me for a moment, darkened the and then said, "Back in 1991, at the assisted living home in Delta, and somewhat at a loss for words, I'd spent a few
Haha,
minutes
Rebecca
admiring
died.
a handful of artifacts on Perry's shelves and desktop. The tall, wooden-staffed ice axe propped in a corner, some examples of stone, which he later told me were taken from the summits of various peaks, and black and white photographs gone seeking image. The small camera on the shelf, a Kodak of the kind one before snapping a picture, was ancient but unrusted. Looked well made. Has film in it from years ago. Never developed. I touched the small camera and turned.
I bet that felt good.
Curious
He really
to see
wanted to
how
kill
your
me.
snaps turned out. Mr. Perry shook his head. I didn't take the pictures. In fact,
Okay.
the camera's not mine. But the
This
druggist here in Delta told me that the film.
this isn't loud enough for me to really pay attention to. I guess I do have speakers next to me. Power button, there's another power. Okay. That worked.
Film would probably still develop. Someday I'll see if the pictures turned out.
Still an introduction. 57-minute introduction. Okay, I'm not going to start that over. I don't really have to skip it.
He waved me to a chair next to the built-in desk. Scattered around the desk, I could see careful drawings of plants, rocks, and trees. "In a long, long time since I've been interviewed," said Mr. Perry, with what might have been an ironic smile. And even then, many decades ago, I had almost nothing to say to the press. I assumed that he was talking about the 1934 bird expedition. I was stupidly wrong on that, and also too stupid to clarify it at the time. My life and this book would have been quite different if I'd had even the most basic journalist's instinct to follow up on such an answer. Instead, I brought the conversation back to myself and said modestly, for an egoist, "I've rarely interviewed anyone. Most of the research I do for my books is in library, including research library. Do you mind if I take notes?" "Not at all," said Mr. Perry. "So it's just my time with Bird's 33 to 35 Antarctic expeditions that you're interested in?" "I think so," I said. "See, I have a kernel of an idea of writing a suspense thriller set in Antarctica. Anything you tell me about South Polar expeditions would be helpful, especially if it's scary." "Scary?" Harry smiled again. "Really? Would there be some evil entity other than the cold and dark and isolation trying to do in your characters?" I returned his smile, but realized I was a little embarrassed. Book plots often sound silly when removed from their wordy context. Let's face it, sometimes they're silly in context. And indeed, I had been thinking of some giant, scary thing to chase and kill and eat my characters. I just had no idea at the time what it might be. "Sort of," I admitted. "Something really big and threatening trying to get at our heroes. Something out in the dark and cold. Something..." Part 1. Climbers. The summit of the Matterhorn offers very clear choices. A misstep to the left, and you die in Italy. A wrong step to the right, and you die in Switzerland. The three of us learn about Mallory and Irvine's disappearance on Mount Everest while we are eating lunch on the summit of the Matterhorn. It is a perfect day in late June of 1924. News lies folded in a 3-day-old British newspaper that someone in the kitchen at the small inn at Brio in Italy has wrapped around our cold beef and horseradish sandwiches on thick, fresh bread. I've unwittingly carried this still weightless news, soon to be a heavy stone in each of our chests, to the summit of the Matterhorn in my rucksack, tucked alongside a goat skin of wine, 2 water bottles, 3 oranges, 100 feet of climbing rope, and a bulky salami. We do not immediately notice the paper or read the news that will change the day for us. We are too full of the summit, its views. For 6 days we have done nothing but climb and reclimb the Matterhorn, always avoiding the summit for reasons known only to the Deacon. On the first day up from Zermatt, we explored the Hornley Ridge, Whymper's route in 1865, while avoiding the fixed ropes and cables that ran across the mountain's skin like so many scars. The next day we tried to do the same on the Zmutt Ridge. On the third day, a long day, we traversed the mountain, again climbing from the Swiss side via the Hornley Ridge, crossing the friable north face just below the summit that the Deacon had forbidden to us, and then descending along the Italian ridge, at twilight reaching our tents on the high green fields facing south toward Brio. I realized after the 5th day that we were following in the footsteps of those who'd made the Matterhorn so famed, the determined artist climber 25-year-old Edward Whymper and his ad hoc party of 3 Englishmen, Reverend Charles Hudson, clergyman from the Crimea, Reverend Hudson's 19-year-old protege and novice climber,
Douglas Hadow, and the confident 18-year-old Lord Francis Douglas, who had just passed at the top of the British Army's examination list, some 500 marks ahead of the next closest of his 118 competitors. The son of the 8th Marquess of Queensberry and a neophyte climber who'd been coming to the Alps for 2 years, along with Whymper's motley assortment of young British climbers with such wildly different levels of experience and ability, the 3 guides Whymper had hired. Old Peter Todwalder, only 45, but considered an oldster, young Peter Todwalder, age 21, and the highly skilled Chamonix guide, 35-year-old Michel Croz. In truth, they would have needed only Croz as a guide, but Whymper had earlier promised employment to the Todwalders, and the English climber was always as good as his word, even when it made his climbing party unwieldy and 2 of the guides essentially redundant. It was on the Italian Ridge that I realized the Deacon was introducing us to the courage and efforts of Whymper's friend, competitor, and former climbing partner, Jean-Antoine Carrel. The difficult routes we were enjoying had been Carrel's. We had our mountain tents, Whymper tents they were still called, since the famous Golden Age climber had designed them for use on this very mountain, pitched on the grassy fields above the lower glaciers on both sides of the mountain, and we arrived on one side or the other just before dusk every evening, often after dark, there to eat lightly, to talk softly by the small fire, and to sleep soundly for a few hours before rising to climb again. We climbed the Matterhorn's Furggen Ridge, but bypassed the impressive overhangs near the top. This was not a defeat. For one full day, we explored approaches to that never-climbed overhang, but we decided that we had neither the equipment nor the skill to climb it direct. The overhang would eventually be climbed by Alfredo Perino and Louis Carrel, known as the Little Carrel, in honor of his famous predecessor, and by Giacomo Chiara, 18 years later in 1942. Our modesty in not killing ourselves in an impossible, given the equipment and techniques of 1924, attempt on the Furggen Ridge overhang reminded me at the time of how I had first met the 39-year-old Englishman Richard Davis Deacon and 25-year-old Frenchman Jean-Claude Clairaut at the base of the unclimbed north face of the Eiger, the deadly Eiger Wand. But that is a tale for another time. The essence is that both Deacon, known as the Deacon to many of his friends and climbing partners, and Jean-Claude, just become a fully accredited Chamonix guide, perhaps the most exclusive climbing fraternity in the world, had agreed to take me along for months of their winter, spring, and early summer climbing in the Alps. It was a greater gift than I had ever dreamed of. I'd enjoyed going to Harvard, but my education with the Deacon and Jean-Claude, whom I eventually came to call JC, since he did not seem to mind the nickname, for those months was by far the most demanding and exhilarating educational experience of my life. At least until the nightmare of Mount Everest. But I get far ahead of my tale. On our last 2 days on the Matterhorn, we made a partial ascent of the mountain by its treacherous west face, then rappelled down to work out routes and strategies on the truly treacherous north face, one of the Alps' final and most formidable unsolved problems. Franz and Tony Schmidt will climb it 7 years later after bivouacking one night on the face itself. They will ride their bicycles all the way from Munich to the mountain, and after their surprise ascent via the north face, ride them home again. For the 3 of us, it was a reconnaissance only. This final day we had teased out routes on the seemingly unassailable Zmutt nose, overhanging the right part of the north face, then retreated, traversed to the Italian Ridge, and, when the Deacon nodded his permission to climb the final 100 feet, finally found ourselves here, on the narrow summit on a perfect day in late June. During our week on the Matterhorn, we endured and climbed through downpours, sudden snowstorms, sleet, ice that turned rock to verglas, and high winds. On this final day, the weather on the summit is clear, calm, warm, and quiet. The winds are so docile that the deacon is able to light his pipe after striking only a single match. The top of the Matterhorn is a narrow ridge about 100 yards long, if you wish to walk the distance between its lower, slightly broader Italian summit and its higher and narrowest point at the Swiss summit. In past 9 months or so, the Deacon and Jean-Claude have taught me that all good mountains give you clear choices. The summit of the Matterhorn offers very clear choices. A misstep to the left and you die in Italy. A wrong step to the right and you die in Switzerland. The Italian side is a sheer rock face falling 4,000 feet to rocks and ridges that would stop a fall about halfway down the face. And the Swiss side falls away to a steep snow slope and rocky ridges hundreds of feet lower than the halfway mark, boulders and ridges that might or might not stop a body's fall. There is enough snow here on the ridgeline itself for us to leave clear prints of our hobnailed boots. The Matterhorn's summit ridge is not quite what excited journalists like to call a knife-edge ridge. Our boot prints in the snow along the actual ridge prove this. Had it been a knife-edge ridge with snow, our boot prints would have been on both sides, since the smart way to traverse a true knife edge is to hobble slowly along like a ruptured duck, one leg on the west side of the narrow summit ridge, one on the east. A slip then will lead to bruised testicles, but not, then fate willing, a 4,000-foot fall. Slightly wider knife-edge ridge of snow, a vertical snow cornice, as it were, would have readied us for what Jean-Claude liked to call a game of jump rope. We'd probably be tied together on such a snowy knife edge, and if the climber directly ahead of or immediately behind you slips off one side, your immediate reaction, since there's little hope of belay from such a snowy knife edge, an immediate reaction made instinctive only by many drills, must be to jump off the opposite side of the ridgeline, both of you now dangling over 4,000 foot or greater emptiness, in the desperate hope that A, the rope does not break, dooming both of you, and B, your weight will counter his weight in the fall. It does work. We practiced it numerous times on a snowy knife-edge ridge on Mont Blanc. But it was a ridge where the punishment for failure, or a rope break, was a 50-foot slide to level snowfields, not a 4,000-foot drop. I was 6 feet 2 inches tall and 220 pounds, so when I played jump the rope with poor Jean-Claude, 5 feet 6 inches tall, 135 pounds, logic would dictate that he'd come flying up over the top of the snowy ridgeline like a hooked fish, sending both of us sliding out of control. But because Jean-Claude had the habit of carrying the heaviest pack of any of us, and was also the quickest and most skilled with his long ice axe, the balancing act usually worked, the heavily stressed hemp rope digging into the vertical snow cornice until it found either rock or solid ice. But, as I say, this long summit ridgeline of the Matterhorn is a wide French boulevard compared to knife-edge ridges, wide enough to walk upon, at least single file in some places, and, if you're very brave, supremely skilled, or totally stupid, to do so with your hands in your pockets and other things on your mind. Deacon has been doing precisely this, pacing back and forth along the narrow line, pulling his old pipe from his jacket pocket and lighting it as he paces. The deacon, who could be taciturn to the point of silence for days, evidently feels expansive this late morning. Puffing on his pipe, he gestures for Jean-Claude and me to follow him in single file to the far side of the summit ridge, the where we can look down on the Italian ridge that saw the majority of the early attempts on the mountain, even by Whymper, until he decided to use the seemingly more difficult, but in truth somewhat easier due to the angle of the huge slabs, Swiss Ridge. Harel and his team were there, says the deacon, and points to a line a third of the way down the narrow, rock-steepled ridge. All those years of effort. Whymper ends up making the summit 2 or 3 hours ahead of his old friend and guide from Italy. He's talking, of course, about Whymper and his 6 fellow climbers' first summit ascent of the Matterhorn on July 14, 1865. Did not Whymper and Croz throw rocks down upon them? Asks Jean-Claude. The deacon looks at our French friend to see if he is joking. Both men smile. The deacon points to the sheer face on our left. Whymper was mad to get Carrel's attention. He and Croz shouted and dropped rocks down the north face, nowhere near the ridge where the Italians were climbing. It must have sounded like cannon fire to Carrel and his team. All 3 of us gazed down as if we could see the heartbroken Italian guide and his companions staring up in shock and defeat. Carrel recognized his old client Whymper's white slop trousers, says the deacon. Carrel thought he was an hour or less from the summit. He'd already led his party past the worst obstacles of the ridge, but after he identified Whymper on the summit, he just turned around and led his party back down. Deacon sighs, inhales deeply from his pipe, and looks out over the mountains, valleys, meadows, and glaciers below us. Harel climbed the Matterhorn 2 or 3 days later, on the Italian ridge, he says softly, almost speaking to himself now, establishing Italy's secondary province, the mountain, even after the British chaps' clear victory. Clear victory, oui, but so tragic, says Jean-Claude. We walk back to where we've stowed our rucksacks against some boulders along the north end of the narrow summit ridge. Jean-Claude and I begin unpacking our lunch. This is to be our last day on the Matterhorn, and it may be our last day climbing together for some time. Perhaps forever. Although I desperately hope not. I want nothing more than to spend the rest of my European Wanderjahr climbing in the Alps with these new friends. The deacon has some business in England soon, and JC has to return to his Chamonix guide duties, and an annual assembly of Chamonix guides in that tradition-haunted Chamonix Valley, with its sacred brotherhood of the rope. Shaking away any sad thoughts of endings or farewells, I pause in my unpacking to take in the view yet again. My eyes are hungrier than my belly. There is not a single cloud in the sky. Maritime Alps 130 miles away are clearly visible. The Écran, first climbed by Whymper and the guide Croz, bulk blankly against the sky like the sides of some great white sow. Turning slightly to look north, I see the high peaks of the Oberland on the far side of the Rhone. To the west, Mont Blanc rules over all lesser peaks, its summit snows blazing with reflected sunlight so blinding I have to squint. Swiveling slightly to face the east, I can see peak after peak. Some climbed by me during the last 9 months with my new friends here, some waiting to be climbed, some never to be climbed. A stuttered and irregular array of white pinnacles diminishing to a mere bumpy horizon wreathed in the haze of distance. The deacon and Jean-Claude are eating their sandwiches and sipping water. I snap myself out of my sightseeing and romantic reverie and begin to eat. The cold roast beef is delicious, bread rich with a crust that makes me work chewing. The horseradish makes my eyes water until Mont Blanc becomes even more of a white blur. Looking south, I celebrate the view that Whymper wrote about in his classic book, Scrambles Amongst the Alps, in the years 1860 to 1869. can clearly recall the words I read only the evening before, read by candlelight in my tent above Briel, the words describing Edward Whymper's first view from the summit of the Matterhorn on July 14, 1865. This view that I'm devouring in late June of 1924. Forests black and gloomy, and meadows bright and lively, bounding waterfalls and tranquil lakes, fertile lands and savage wastes, sunny plains and frigid plateau. There were the most rugged forms and the most graceful outlines, bold, perpendicular cliffs and gentle, undulating slopes, rocky mountains and snowy mountains, somber and solemn, or glittering and white with walls, turrets, pinnacles, pyramids, domes, cones, and spires. It was every combination that the world can give and every contrast that the heart could desire. Yes, you can tell that Edward Whymper was an absolute romantic, as were so many of the Golden Age climbers in the mid and late 1800s. And his writing is flowery and old-fashioned by the lean, modern standards of 1924. But as to the charge of being a hopeless romantic, I confess that I am as well. Part of my nature. Perhaps it is my nature. And although I'd graduated from Harvard as an English major, ready to write my own great travelogues and novels, all in the lean, modern style, of course, I'm surprised to find that Edward Whymper's 19th century wording, flowery prose and all, once again moved me to tears. So on this June day in 1924, my heart responds to the words written more than 50 years earlier, and my soul responds even more hopelessly to the view that prompted those words from the sentimental Edward Whymper. The great mountain climber was 25 years old when he first climbed the Matterhorn and saw this view. I'd just celebrated my 22nd birthday, 2 months before earning this view for myself. I feel very close to Whymper and to all the climbers. Some of them hard-bitten cynics, but others romantics like myself, who have looked south at Italy from this very ridge, from this very throne, below Boulder. During the autumn, winter, and spring months that I've been climbing in the Alps with Jean-Claude and the Deacon, there has been a question and answer session after each summit, a catechism, as it were, for each mountain. The tone of the questioning has never been condescending, and I've actually enjoyed the process, since I've learned so much from the two alpinists. I've been a good climber when I came to Europe from the United States. Under Jean-Claude's and the Deacon's gentle, sometimes bantering, but never pedantic guidance, I know that I'm becoming an excellent climber, a world-class climber, part of a very small fraternity indeed. More than that, the Deacon's and Jean-Claude's tutelage, including these summiting catechisms, have helped me learn how to love the mountain I've just climbed. Love it even though she may have been a treacherous bitch during my intimate time with her. Rotten rock, avalanches, traverses without so much as a fingerhold, deadly rockfall, forced bivouacs on ledges too narrow to hold a book upright, yet we were forced to cling there in freezing weather, hailstorms or thunderstorms, nights when the metal pick in my ice axe glowed blue with its anticipatory electrical discharge, hot days without so much as a sip of water, and more bivouac nights when, without pitons to tie oneself in, you held a lit candle under your chin to keep from falling asleep and tumbling off into the void. Yet through all that, the Deacon and especially Jean-Claude were teaching me how to love the mountain, love her for what she truly was, while loving even the hardest times spent engaged with her. Catechism for the Matterhorn is led by Jean-Claude and is briefer than most. You must love something about every good mountain. Matterhorn is a good mountain. Did you love the faces of this mountain? No. The faces of the Matterhorn, especially the north face upon which we spent the most time, were not worth loving. They were rubble. They were constant rockfall and avalanche. But you love the rock itself. No, the rock is treacherous, private, lies. Drive in a piton with a hammer and you never hear the proper ring of steel against iron, of iron against rock. And a minute later, you can easily pull the useless piton out with 2 fingers. The rock on the faces of the Matterhorn is terrible. Mountaineers know that all mountains are in a constant state of collapse, their verticality being inescapably and inevitably worn down every moment by wind, water, weather, and gravity. The Matterhorn is more of an unstable pile of constantly crumbling rubble than most peaks. Love the rock here? No, never. But you love the ridges? No. The famous ridges of the Matterhorn, the Italian and the Swiss, the Fergan and the Zmutt, are either too dangerous, raked with rockfall and snow avalanche, or too tame, pocked with cables and fixed ropes for the lady climber and the 70-year-old English gentleman. Love for this mountain's ridges? There is none, at least not since Edward Whymper's day, when all was new. But you love the mountain. You know you do. What do you love? We. Matterhorn is a mountain that gives the climber numerous problems to solve. But, unlike the unclimbed north face of the Eiger and certain other peaks I've seen or heard about, the Matterhorn also gives a good climber a clean, clear solution to each problem. The Matterhorn is a heap of tumbling rubble, but the faces and ridges are beautiful to look upon from a distance. She is like an aging actress who, beneath the sadly obvious and peeling makeup, still boasts the cheeks and bone structure of her younger self, and there are frequent glimpses of a once near-perfect beauty. The shape of the peak itself, standing alone, unconnected to other mountains, is perhaps the cleanest and most memorable in all the Alps. Ask a young child who has never seen mountains to draw a mountain, and she will use her crayon to draw the Matterhorn. It is that iconic, and with its upper north face actually bending out beyond the vertical, like a wave breaking, the mountain appears to be constantly in motion, and that sheer, overhanging face breeds its own weather, gives rise to its own masses of clouds. It is that serious a mountain. And you love the ghosts. The ghosts are there to love and cannot be avoided. Edward Whymper's loyal guide, Jean-Antoine Carrel's patriotic betrayal in choosing to lead Felice Giordano up the Italian ridge for the glory of an all-Italian first summit on July 14th of 1865. The ghosts of 25-year-old Whymper's desperate dash to Zermatt, to try the opposing ridge with his hastily assembled party of young Lord Francis Douglas, Reverend Charles Hudson, 19-year-old Douglas Haddo, the Chamonix guide Michel Croze, and the 2 local guides, young Peter and old Peter Togwall. The ghosts of the 4 dead men from that day speak the loudest from the stone to me, and any climber must learn to hear them and to love and respect climbing on the same stones they trod, sleeping on the same slabs where they slept, triumphing on the same narrow summit where Whymper's 7 shouted in triumph, and focusing hard on descending safely down the still treacherous section where 4 of them fell thousands of feet to their deaths. And, mon ami, you love the view from the top. We do love the view. Makes the aching muscles and bleeding hands all worthwhile, better than worthwhile. Forgotten. The view is all. While I'm chewing and staring out at this view, Jean-Claude, catechism lesson for me completed, straightens out the newspaper that had been wrapped around the cheesecloth covering our sandwiches. Mallory and Irvine killed in attempt to conquer Everest. He reads aloud in his soft French accent. Quit chewing. The deacon is in the process of tamping the embers or ashes out of his pipe before eating, batting the pipe against the side of his hobnailed boot. But he also freezes in place, boot on his knee, and now empty pipe against the boot, and stares at Jean-Claude. Friend continues. London, June 20, 1924. The Mount Everest Committee has received with profound regret the following cablegram from... He stops and thrusts the crumpled newspaper toward me. Tink, it is your language. You should read it. Surprised, not understanding Jean-Claude's reticence, as far as I know, he's as completely fluent in reading English as he is in speaking it. I take the paper, smooth it out some more on my knee, and read aloud. London, June 20, 1924. The Mount Everest Committee has received with profound regret the following cablegram from Colonel Norton. Dispatched from Fari DeLong, June 19 at 4:50 p.m. Mallory and Irvine killed on last attempt. The party arrived at base camp all well that day. 2 climbers who were not members of the expedition die in Everest avalanche on last day after others have left. The committee has telegraphed to Colonel Norton expressing deep sympathy with the expedition in the loss of their 2 gallant comrades, which must have been due to most unfavorable conditions of weather and snow, which from the first arrival at the scene of operations impeded climbing this year. Continue reading the columns, part sorrowful report, part hagiography. Tragic death of these 2 men, George Lee Mallory, who alone of all those engaged in the present attempt had also taken part in the 2 previous expeditions, and A.C. Irvine, one of his band of recruits, is a terribly sad ending to the story of the assaults of the mountain that began 3 years ago. It's only a few days since we published Mallory's own account of the second reverse suffered by the present expedition. That reverse had been wind and snow, which had driven the men from their highest camps, discomfited but very far from being defeated, with Mallory's message to the Times. There followed several more paragraphs, summarizing Mallory's refusal to surrender despite the cold weather, high winds, avalanches, and imminent onset of the monsoon that would end this year's climbing season. I pause and look at my 2 friends, seeking any signal that I should quit reading and hand the newspaper around, but Jean-Claude and the deacon simply stare at me, waiting for more. A slight breeze has come up, so I grip the crumpled paper tightly now as I continue reading the long second column of prose. Mallory wrote his whole dispatch in this spirit of one who was about to engage in a desperate battle. The action, he said, is only suspended before the more intense action of the climax. The issue will shortly be decided. The 3rd time we walk up East Rongbuk Glacier will be the last, for better or worse. He had counted the odds and was ready to face them. We expect, he said in a later passage of his dispatch, no mercy from Everest. And Everest, alas, has taken him at his word. I lower the paper. The deacon and Jean-Claude sit waiting.
Part 1 is... Part 1 is 10 hours. And then part 2 is 8 hours. And then part 3 has separate. What the fuck? That's them. They fucked this up. It's really annoying because, like, I would break it up into the chapters for them and just give them the files back, but no, we can't do that. Okay, well, I'm not gonna keep going for what? not good at this. None of those were. Okay, to figure out exactly what my power is. Damn. Turn the book back on.
Far beyond the deacon's shoulder, a large raven hovers motionless on the slight breeze,
Believe they
its
didn't
body
just cut it
poised
into
above almost
chapters.
5,000 feet of empty air. I skip any criticism of the prose style and continue reading. Mallory's history as a distinguished mountaineer and his absolute determination to summit Mount Everest. Alas, I think, do not say. The contributions of General C.G. Bruce, Major E.F. Norton, and others in the past, surpassing the Duke of Abruzzi's height record of 22,000 feet, set on a distant and irrelevant mountain named K2. The story focuses on 37-year-old George Lee Mallory, the determined and tested veteran of Everest, and young Andrew Irvine, only 22 years old, my age exactly, leaving their high camp on the morning of June 8th, presumably carrying oxygen apparatus, the two heroes being seen again only once more, hours later, by fellow climber Noel Odell, who glimpsed them going strong for the top, and then the clouds closing in, snowstorm intervening, and neither Mallory nor Irvine seen again. I read aloud that, according to the Times report, on the evening of their disappearance, Odell had gone all the way up to the precarious Camp 6, shouting out in the roaring high-altitude night in case Mallory and Irvine were trying to descend in darkness. Mallory had left his flare and lantern behind in the tent at Camp 6. He would have had no means to signal others below, even if he were alive the terrible night. After 50 hours had passed, said the Times tale, even the ever-faithful Noel Odell gave up hope and placed 2 sleeping bags in the shape of a T for observers with telescopes at the lower camps to see.
Yep.
The arranged signal meant that no further search should be attempted. 2 climbers were lost. Finally, I lower the paper. The rising breeze tugs at it. The raven no longer marks the sky, and the sky itself is darkening now with afternoon. Shake my head, feeling the strong emotion from my 2 friends, but not really understanding the depth and complexity of it. It's just a little more of the same, I say, my voice hoarse. Deacon moves at last. He puts his cold pipe in the chest pocket of his tweed jacket. He said there were 2 more, he says softly. What? The first paragraph said that 2 died. Oh, I fumble with the paper, running my finger down the last column to the final paragraphs. Everything is Mallory and Irvine, Irvine and Mallory, and then Mallory again. But there, at the end, here, it says, after the main party had left Everest Base Camp, according to German explorer Bruno Siegel, who was on a reconnaissance mission for a possible future German attempt on Everest, Siegel witnessed 32-year-old Lord Percival Bromley, brother of the 5th Marquess of Lexeter and a German or Austrian climber whom Siegel identified as Kurt Meyer, being swept away by an avalanche between Camp 5 and Camp 6. Young Bromley, Lord Percival, while not a formal member of the Mallory expedition led by Colonel Norton, had followed the expedition from Darjeeling to the Everest base camp. Although the monsoon season had arrived and Colonel Norton's expedition had retreated from the mountain, it is thought that perhaps Lord Percival and Meyer were making one final attempt to locate George Mallory and Sandy Irvine. The bodies of Lord Percival and the German or Austrian climber were not recovered. Lower the paper again. Lord Bromley, a peer of your realm, dies on Mount Everest, and it barely makes the newspaper, mutters Jean-Claude. It is all Mallory and Irvine. Lord Percival, or Lord Percy, is how we say it in England. The deacon says very softly, Lord Bromley is his older brother, the Marquess. Percy Bromley would have been poor excuse for it, even if he had been next in line. George Mallory, though from a humble background, was the royalty on that expedition. Deacon stands, puts his hands in his trouser pockets, and strolls away down the narrow lane, his head low. He looks like nothing so much as an absent-minded professor walking on campus, pondering some esoteric problem in his field. When the deacon is out of hearing range, I whisper to Jean-Claude, did he know Mallory or Irvine? Jean-Claude looks at me and then leans closer, speaking so softly that it is almost a whisper, even though the deacon is many yards away. Irvine, I do not know, Jake. But Mallory, yes, the deacon knew him for many years. Before the war, they were students in the same small college in Cambridge. During the war, they crossed paths on the battlefields many times. The deacon was invited by Mallory to go on the 1921 reconnaissance and 1922 Everest climbing expeditions, and did so. There was no invitation from Mallory or the Alpine Club for this year's attempt on Everest. Good heavens! Today I thought I'd really begun to know my two new friends and climbing partners. Now it seems that I know and knew almost nothing. Could have been Mallory and the deacon, rather than young Sandy Irvine missing on Everest. I whisper to JC. Jean-Claude bites his chapped lip, looks to make sure that the deacon is still far away on the Italian side summit, seeming to be staring out at nothing. No, whispers Jean-Claude. During the first two expeditions, Mallory and the deacon had several, how do you say it in English, falling downs. For a moment I imagine the two climbers falling while roped together, but then understand. Falling out, I say. Oui. Serious outfallings, I am afraid. I am sure that Mallory had not spoken to the deacon since they returned from the 22 expedition. Falling out over what? I whisper. The wind has risen again and is blowing icy pellets of summit snow into our faces. The first expedition. It was officially called a reconnaissance expedition, but the actual goal for Mallory and the others was to find the fastest route to the mountain through all the ice falls and glaciers at its base, and then begin climbing as soon as possible. I know that both Deacon and Mallory believed they might summit during that first effort in 1921. Vicious, I murmur. Deacon is still at his remote perch on the Italian end of the summit ridge. With the wind now blowing even more strongly from his direction, I doubt he could hear us even if we shouted. Still, Jean-Claude and I continue our conversation in little more than a hurried whisper. So, Mallory insisted that the best way to the North Pole, the most obvious route from the north side of Everest, was from the east, up the Carter Valley. It was a, how do you say, cul-de-sac? Dead end. Jean-Claude grins. Sometimes I think he enjoys the rough-edged quality of English. Oui, a very dead end. Mallory kept leading them all around the mountain, pursuing one dead end after the other. He even had Guy Bullock go so far up the West Rongbuk that they almost crossed the border into Nepal, looking over to the south approaches to Everest and deciding that the glaciers and ice falls approaching the south face and ridges were totally impassable. The solution had to be on this north face side. Wonder, I whisper, but more to myself than to JC. At any rate, months were wasted, says Jean-Claude. Wasted at least as far as the Deacon was concerned. Exploring ever eastward and westward, measuring everything, photographing everything, never finding a workable approach to the North Col. I've seen some of the photographs, I say, glancing to make sure that the Deacon is still at the far end of the summit. He doesn't appear to have moved a muscle. Beautiful. Yes, says JC. But the first series of photographs for which Harry planned a serious peek to gain the perfect vantage point. He put the plates in the camera the wrong way around. Nothing came out on the print, of course. Bullock and the others did most of the real photography. What's this got to do with Mallory and the Deacon falling out, I ask. Almost becoming enemies after so many years of association and, I presume, mutual respect. Jean-Claude sighs. Their first base camp near the mountain was pitched at the head of a small valley where a river runs down onto the plain. They must have walked by that valley 100 times but never explored. The Deacon wanted to look into it as a possible approach
I got
to the
it.
North Col right from the beginning, but Mallory always overruled, insisting that he just ran to the East Rongbuk Glacier and stopped. They could see the entrance to a side valley, easy walking with gravel and just pinnacles of old snow as all that was left of the former glacier. And the Deacon suggested that this valley might curve west again, which it does, and would give them a safe and easy path to the North Col and the beginning of their climb. Mallory said no to that.
Okay.
What is the word? That opportunity. And the weeks of useless reconnoitering to both the east and west dragged on. Also, Mallory and the Alpine Club had decided
Yeah,
the
I'm
summer
here. I only have
monsoon
pyramid
season
huts so
was the
far.
best time to try to climb Mount Everest. But
I
by
tried
June,
with Oni,
even
and it was
Monsieur
really
Mallory
hard.
had to agree that the summer monsoon season, with its
I've gotten a
endless
few poor
snowfall,
tales of flight
was
before.
bad. A bad
But
time to reconnoiter the
That was
mountain,
beginner's luck.
much less
I don't really
to
know how to
attempt
use
the
them.
climb, since the storms were much, how do you say it, more fiercer higher up. So that was their 1922 falling out, I whisper. Jean-Claude smiles, almost sadly. The last brick. No, what do you say? The last something that breaks the back of the camel? Straw. The last straw was the Deacon's constant urging that they climb Lac Pala to get a view from there. For many weeks, Mallory thought such an effort would be useless and said no to the Deacon's request.
I mean,
What's Lac Pala? I ask. My knowledge of Mount Everest's
Well, on this
immediate
curve, we
geography
only
in
have
this
a
late
kind of
June of
spread.
1924 is just about
this
non-existent.
hurts. Right?
Essentially, I know that the tallest peak in the world shares a border with Nepal and Tibet, that Tibet is the only way one could get to it, given the politics of the era, and that this meant the climb, should it ever happen, will have to be up the north face, up the northeast ridge above the north ridge and the north face, to be specific, if all of the expedition's photographs are to be believed. Lac Pala is a high pass to the west that separates the Karta Glacier from the East Rongbuk Glacier, says JC. They climbed to it in an absolute blinding blizzard, pole posting. Is that the word, Jake? Post-poling. Post-poling up to their waists in the
what did
deepening
I-
snow, able to see nothing, even when they reached the flat area they assumed was the summit. Even setting up
Oh,
their tents was a
right.
nightmare in
It
the
hasn't
blizzard,
started
and
yet.
Mallory was
Okay.
furious at the waste of time. Then, in the morning, the weather completely cleared, and from their snow-covered camp on Lac Pala, they could see the perfect route to the North Col, directly up the valley and side valley, which Deacon had argued so many times they explore, and then across snow and ice up onto the other side of the Cune, and then, without any apparent difficulty, up onto the North Col itself, and from there, directly to the North Ridge all the way up to the high Northeast Ridge. But the monsoon snows kept burying them. The winds were terrible, and even though they reconnoitered the correct route all the way to a 1,000-foot ice wall that led up onto the North Col, it was too late in the year to attempt the summit. They withdrew from the mountain on the 24th of September without ever actually setting foot on the bare rock of Mount Everest. The Deacon has been Part 2.
Oh my god. When I tapped my phone to brighten the screen, it hit forward. And now I've lost my place in that fucking 10-hour chapter. Which is exactly why I was fucking bitching about. I'm just gonna have them refund that. I don't want that shit. I've already got a decent copy of it somewhere. It's really cool when I piss myself off this much. I'm gonna go.